PFC Hendry and his buddy Reed sat back up on the edge of their hole, relieved that the Furs helicopter had come and gone without incident. Punk punk punk. The sound of NVA 82mm mortar rounds exiting its tube was distinct, and Hendry and Reed exchanged nervous glances before dropping back into their holes. All of Bravo Company were making like moles to count the 30 or so seconds between exit and impact. Punk 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 punk. The waiting was the worst part about mortars to Hendry, and this time he was acutely aware that the tube was still belching out rounds even before the first one had arched in on them. Christ, won't they ever stop? The first explosion was 300 meters north of them, around that road junction, and with 2 minutes the NVA placed 40 or 50 rounds in that area. The NVA were obviously firing without a forward observer, guesstimating the distance between their tube and where they had seen the helo alight, but no Marine took satisfaction in their foes' misjudged bombardment. The NVA were usually too damn good with their mortars, and even this raid was in a very effective pattern that surely would have caused casualties had it been on target. The second helicopter touched down, unloaded, and took off within 30 seconds, and as the noise of its engine subsided, the thumping of the enemy mortar began again. Everyone was already down in their holes. This time the Goonies will be on target, Hendry thought, as did his hole partner, Reed, who seemed to be on the verge of freaking out as they waited for the impact. But what can you do, Hendry mused, a mortar round doesn't have eyes. If it lands in your hole, that's that. If it lands outside your hole, all you get is a good scare and maybe a few bells ringing in your head. The explosions began. It was the same concentrated pattern of 40 or 50 rounds, closer but still more than 100 meters off target. When this mortaring ceased, Captain Coates gave the word to saddle up and move out quickly. It was already dusk, and they still had to move to their night position and dig in. As each man passed the landing zone, he grabbed either a case of sea rations or a 5-gallon water can. PFC Hendry, for one, ended up with a case of C's under his left arm and his M16 swinging in his right as he followed the lineup Route 561 straight toward the mortar impact area. What the hell's the captain think he's doing? A 300-meter hump brought them near the marketplace's first road junction into a flat, brushy area with good fields of fire, and here they deployed, letting the main road slice through the middle of their perimeter. The area was already dotted with old fighting holes, as well as the junked remains of an Ontus, a tracked vehicle mounted with 6 recoilless rifles, which sat as a reminder inside their lines. The evening rituals commenced. Burns, King, and Reyes got their platoon sectors from Coates, then they assigned each of their squads a portion, and the squad leaders got down to placing their men. In Corporal Haynes's squad, Hendry, Reed, and a third man, Corporal Cesar Eduardo Carvalho, were assigned a position near what looked to be a 155mm artillery crater. Dropping their gear, they got down to shoveling the shell crater into a 3-man fighting hole. They were finishing up when Corporal Haynes decided to move Hendry from this position to one with Demers. Hendry picked up his flak jacket, only to discover it was covered with red ants. As was the rest of his gear, so carrying it instead of wearing it, he trudged over to Demers's position. Demers was sitting beside an old fighting hole, and Hendry threw his gear down and broke out his E-tool so the hole would accommodate his 6'5" frame. By the time Hendry was finished chopping at the sides and scooping the loose dirt out, they were joined by a man from Rockets. This Marine, a lazy guy, wasn't too hot on digging a larger hole, so he said that if anything happened he'd use the artillery crater about 15 meters away. It was then that an NVA fired into Bravo Company's position. 1 shot, no casualties. The NVA was probably a scout sent to determine what damage, none, the mortaring had wreaked. This is something different, thought Staff Sergeant Burns, who had never known the NVA to waste more than 10 rounds to harass a Marine patrol, and as the Marines divided their watches, 1 man up, 2 asleep, each man sacked out until his turn came with his flak jacket for a pillow and his poncho liner pulled over him. Even the usually skeptical PFC Henderson doubted whether anyone was screwing off, sleeping, on watch this night. They all knew something was up. The ambushes were the most alert. Lance Corporal Herbert's squad had the ambush from Bravo-2, and they set in along Route 561 south of the perimeter, between their lines and the strip. During the night they could hear noises to their rear south like cans rattling, but Herbert, a young, smart squad leader, brushed it off as the scurrying of nocturnal animals in a pile of old, unburied C-ration cans. CPL Michael D. Pitts's squad had the ambush from Bravo-1, and they set in along Route 561 north of the perimeter, between their lines and the DMZ. During the night they could hear noises to their front north, but Pitts could not brush them off. They were voices. Vietnamese voices. Pitts and squad were set in at the rightward-leaning T-junction. The NVA were up at the next crossroad, which was a leftward-leaning T-junction because the trail ran into Route 561 from the east and ended there. The NVA did not venture south into Pitts's ambush. Part 2: The Walking Dead. From the Command Chronology 9th Marines, July 1967, Operation Buffalo commenced at 1000 H, July 2, 67, when B-19 made contact with 2 battalions of the 90th NVA Regiment, 324B NVA Division, in grid squares YD 1272 and 1372. Form the comments of Col George E. Giroux, CO, 9th Marines, made during an interview with the 3D Marine Division Historical Section. It is felt by most of the people that were close to the operation and those who actually took part in it, that we had surprised the NVA, and we still believe that they were preparing positions from which to launch an attack, quite probably towards Con Tien. From the Operations of U.S. Marine Forces, Vietnam, July 1967, the action developed rapidly into a well-coordinated attack by 5 NVA battalions. The enemy, for the first time in the war, employed both light and medium artillery in mass and in close coordination with his ground attack, in addition to using both mortars and flamethrowers. The remaining companies of the 1st Battalion, 9th Marines, maneuvered rapidly both overland and by helicopter to reinforce and relieve the pressure on Company B. They came under heavy mortar and artillery fire as they entered the action, and the battle throughout was intense and at close quarters. Chapter 6 Sunday morning. PFC George M. Blau of the 2D Platoon, Alpha Company, 1st Battalion, 9th Marines, 3D Marine Division, greeted the sunrise of Sunday, July 2, 1967, the first official day of Operation Buffalo through fatigue-hooded eyes. It had been a long night. Blau was on watch when he heard something in the bushes beyond their perimeter. Someone was moving out there in the dark, not too far away. Blau was a new guy, one of their replacements after the latest Fuan tragedy, and not sure how to handle this. He slid back to Corporal Solomon, leader of the squad to which he'd recently and temporarily been attached. Blau woke Solomon, who, in turn, told him to wake everybody in the immediate vicinity and alert them that a grenade was going to be thrown at a possible movement. Blau was then to return to his hole and await Solomon's signal to throw the frag. This Blau did, but when he turned back towards Solomon after dropping back in his hole and scooping up a grenade, he saw that Solomon was asleep again. Solomon had been there a long time, and it was obvious now to Blau that he hadn't taken this Cherry's report very seriously. PFC Blau put the grenade down and picked up his M16, staring into the dark with his heart in his throat. He could hear something rustling the bushes again. He didn't know what to do. You couldn't fire at night because the muzzle flash would reveal your position, and you could only lob out an anonymously delivered grenade with permission. Blau, the uncertain new guy, was reduced for the next 45 minutes to whispering loudly into the black whenever he heard the brush rustling again. If you understand English, don't move or I'll fucking kill ya. When Blau's watch was finally over, Corporal Solomon was up next. Blau had just lain down and had been asleep for what seemed like 5 minutes when Solomon crawled back to him. Hey, there is somebody in the bushes. Where's the grenades? I don't know. Blau did know, but as he thought, with new guy dumbness, he fucked with me, I figure I'll fuck with him. Solomon's dark eyes flashed with anger, and he was still pissed off. So was Blau when their twilight patrol discovered trampled vegetation out in those noisy bushes. Now you see, or hear, them, now you don't. As Alpha Company saddled up, Lance Corporal Quigley of the attached scout team brushed his teeth just as he did every morning. Quigley had this about clean teeth, but although he used only 2 or 3 capfuls of canteen water, Corporal Power, the senior scout, bit into him as he did every morning. "Quigley, goddammit, you're wastin' that fucking water. A little scuzz on your teeth, man, fuck that shit. Live with the scuzz. You're gonna need that water. Fuck, man, bitch about something else. It's my water. Bitch when I ask you for your water." Corporal Power had played this game with Quigley many a morning, as he had played similar games with the man who was his partner before Quigley, and the man before that. The scout section had lost 4 of 8 men in March, 2 or 3 of the remaining 4 in April, and, after replacements, 3 of 5 in May. Through it all, Power had remained a constant, having originally joined the battalion's 106mm recoilless rifle platoon in February 1966. His baptism of fire had actually been in April 1965 with the 6th Marines in the Dominican Republic, when 19 was down around Da Nang. He had shrapnel scars from a booby trap down his back, the reminders of a mortar across his chest, and a battalion-wide reputation so that guys who had been there 4 or 5 months, that was considered a long time with the Walking Dead, would nudge guys who'd been there a few weeks and motion toward Power. "You see that guy over there? That's the motherfucker who came over here and started this war, man. It's all his fault." Corporal Power, who was a natural-born actor and bullshitter, a very intelligent young man of 20 who had joined the crops to escape the blue-collar drabness of Livonia, Georgia, did not let his audience down. During the Buddhist uprising in Da Nang, when ARVN tanks battled each other in the streets, Power and a buddy could think of no better time to steal a jeep and, packing grenades and .45s, go pussy hunting amid the gunfire. The result of that jaunt was a bus to private first class. When snipers popped off at them, Power would stand up, as long as they were in VC land and not up against NVA, to beat his chest and roar, and when new officers rotated in, he would go into his salty, "I've seen it all" routine. "Hey, whoa, you're gonna tell me what to do. I was here when you were a junior at fucking Auburn somewhere. When you were fucking sorority sisters, I was killing gooks." Corporal Power was a definite piece of work, but Captain Slater, for one, considered him a definite asset in the field with his extensive bushcult experience. With Power's S2 team, this time around were Lance Corporal Quigley, the son of a sergeant major and a solid scout. You had to be pretty goddamn gung-ho to volunteer for this shit, as Power thought, and the Kit Carson scout Chien, a good soldier though a slightly built man, as his marine-sized helmet and flak jacket emphasized. Power, Quigley, and Chien waited with Captain Slater's command group as helicopters landed in their perimeter this Sunday morning to retrieve the water cans from the previous resupply and to take aboard the lieutenant and first sergeant who'd arrived the previous evening to pay the troops. Power was glad to be with Slater. For all of his captain contact behavior, Power still had a lot of confidence in Slater's unflappable presence, and he'd rather go out with Alpha A Go-Go than with any other company in the battalion. When Lance Corporal Herbert of the 2D squad of Bravo 2 brought his ambush in and reported the night's activities to his platoon commander, Lieutenant King informed him that they would be continuing north that morning. Specifically, Herbert's 8-man squad and CPL Margarito Garza's 2-man machine gun team were to walk point for 2D platoon into the marketplace on Route 561, and 2D platoon was to walk point for Bravo Company. They would be followed by the company headquarters and by the 3D and weapons platoons, while the 1st platoon remained in their overnight position with the entire company's packs and overnight gear to await the morning resupply. Once the helicopters had delivered it, 1st platoon would have to pay for their day of relative inactivity by humping the resupply, plus all the packs and overnight gear, to a pre-designated area that 2D, 3D, and weapons were already expected to have reached, and where they would dig in for their 2nd consecutive night above the strip. With that, and by now it was about 0800, Lance Corporal Herbert placed his best point man, Frank Lapinto, who also happened to be his best friend, out in front. Lapinto was a tough mother. Shirtless beneath his flak jacket and slung with an especially heavy load of grenades and ammunition, he moved down the dirt cart trail they called Route 561. The trail was 8 to 10 feet wide and bordered by hedgerows that grew along the trail's embankments and were actually above the helmets bobbing on the road, especially where the trail was worn 3 to 4 feet below ground level. Behind Lapinto and Herbert's squad, Lieutenant King tramped in line with Sergeant Clopton's and Corporal Haynes's squads. Stretching out then behind 2D platoon from their overnight position, with its burnt ontos, came Staff Sergeant Reyes's 3D platoon, tailed by Captain Coates and his command group. Bringing up the rear on the road was Sergeant Huff's 60mm mortar section. While they humped past the first shattered, pockmarked concrete buildings of the marketplace, Staff Sergeant Burns's 1st platoon carried the company's packs and overnight gear up the road a bit to an area that would accommodate resupply helicopters. With 2 squads securing the landing zone, the 3rd squad recovered the water cans and rations kicked from the doors of the hovering choppers, tossed aboard the empty cans from the previous resupply, and saw the pay officer who'd choppered out the day before go off. Bravo Company's initial objective was the rightward-leaning T-junction up Route 561. Lance Corporal Herbert's Point Squad, which had worked this area before and knew the location of every NVA spider hole and trench, was surprisingly preceded to the junction by a squad from the trailing 3D platoon. Herbert's radio was beginning to blink out, but the message did get through about this squad moving up on the flank, which was lucky, Herbert thought, because if uninformed they might have ended up killing each other. The 3D platoon squad had already secured the crossroads and were down along the side of the road when Herbert's people arrived. They reported that they'd seen nothing. Herbert halted his squad and called up Lieutenant King, who told him to deploy in a wedge formation on the right flank of the road, then, get down and wait for the other squads in the platoon to move up and get online with them. When they did, King gave the word and the 2D platoon swept several hundred meters forward to the leftward-leaning T-junction. To their right rear some distance away was Hill 70, hills were named for their heights in meters, which was actually 2 adjacent little knobs with a connecting saddle, and which was bald except for its blanket of waist-high elephant grass. The 2D platoon halted at the second junction, and Herbert set his squad in on the right flank, facing Hill 70 to the southeast, with Garza's attached gun team. Lieutenant King explained to them that 3D platoon was going to pass through their perimeter to assume the company point. The 3D platoon would then continue north another 300 meters on the road and sweep that area, while 2D platoon secured the CP and the 60mm mortars and sent elements east on the east-west trail intersecting their north-south road to sweep that area. After 3D platoon had completed their clockwise sweep of several hedgerow squares with 2D platoon standing by to reinforce if contact should be made, they would secure another spot on the road for 2D platoon to leapfrog through to conduct the next sweep while, this time, 3D platoon stood by. Another long, hot day of routine misery and boredom. They never found anything, that is unless the NVA wanted to be found. After the helicopters had bounced in and out of Alpha Company's position for their water cans and rear echelon types, Captain Slater gave the word and their hump to the north commenced. They were some 1,500 meters west of Bravo Company, and their sweep was generally on the same axis and at the same foot-plodding speed. Alpha 2 was on point, followed by the company headquarters. Slater meant to have 1st and 3D platoons uncoil next from their overnight rice paddy, but the 2D platoon was only 800 meters into the hump, it was 0915, when there was a sudden explosion from the point. It had started. Corporal Solomon's squad, screening the flank of the point squad, had tripped a booby trap, a grenade from the sound of it, and the lead man in their file was down. This was a black Marine, and one of his legs had been blown off below the knee, the other leg was shredded by shrapnel. While 2 corpsmen, one a vet and the other a cherry, moved to this man, the rest of the squad halted in place. The second man in the line, an Hispanic, sat on a paddy dike along with the third man in line, namely PFC Blau, where they were joined by Corporal Solomon. Word was passed for Solomon's squad to move out on the flank so as to provide security for the helicopter. PFC Blau waited for the number 2 man, the Hispanic Marine, to take the point, but then Corporal Solomon pointed his M16 at him in what might have been a careless gesture, but which seemed intentional and threatening. Solomon was still pissed. "Blau, you're walkin' point. Hey, fuck, you know. Blau stood up, wishing he were back with his squad. He didn't know these Marines, and this Solomon character seemed a real prick. He wondered if the fact that the number 2 man was an Hispanic like Solomon had anything to do with the squad leader's decision to put him, the 3rd man, up front. Fuck it, Blau thought, I'll go. It was about time he found out what Walking Point was all about. What the fuck? Blau had just started off through a patch of scrub brush, and was suddenly sprawled out, the echo of a booby-trapped grenade ringing in his head. Blau's legs were mangled. Corporal Power, back with the command group, started up the staggered, and now halted, column, the desiccated patties shimmering under the unrelenting sun. He had recognized the explosions as grenades. There were shouts from the point. Marines down. Nearby, Captain Slater was on the radio with 2D platoon, and a voice crackled through, "Else up here. I'll let you know." Silence. Slater tried again, "This is Alpha 6 Actual. What's going on?" A different voice answered, presumably the radioman of the previous speaker, who had presumably headed for the scene of the crime. "I don't know." Slater turned to Power and told him to find out what was happening, so leaving Quigley and Chien, Power moved up the column. Marines passed the word as he passed them. "Mines. Mines. Mines are up there." Power made it to the point elements, alert all the while, not only because he'd been warned but because the feeling was on him again. These fuckers, man, they're here. They are fucking here. He knew what the NVA knew, that heat-wilted Marines tended to ignore their training and use the paddy dikes and farmer-carved hedgerow breaks. As such, Power avoided more possible booby traps by going through the hedges wherever they looked weak enough to push through bodily. Confronted with another hedgerow, he started through a spot of thinning brush in the thorny obstacle, and there on the other side was a goddamn US 105mm artillery round. Power froze. The NVA were experts at converting dud rounds into booby traps. He knelt and bent forward to inspect the heavy, squat projectile. It was partially hidden and dirt was scraped up around it, but he could clearly see the missing component in the base plate through which the NVA had removed the shell's explosives. Only the metal casing remained. Power had seen this trick before. The idea was to place a shell with just enough showing so that an alert Marine would spot it, then back up thinking it was booby-trapped and bump into the real booby traps on the flanks of this paper tiger. Power proceeded past the howitzer round without trouble. "That's clear. I'm on their path." On the other side of the hedgerow, he saw the Marine he took to be the point squad leader. Presumably this was Solomon, but Power did not know the man. There was another hedgerow between the squad leader and where the booby traps had gone off. "Get up there and see what the fuck they're doing," the squad leader called to the man in front of him, pointing to a man-made hedgerow opening. Power called to the squad leader, "Hey, don't send that guy through there. Bring him over here, run him through here." The squad leader shot Power a look that translated into, "Hey, man, this is my fucking squad, who the fuck are you?" He said nothing to Power, then looked back at his rifleman, "Get the fuck up there." The squad leader returned his attention to Power and they were looking each other right in the eye when the Marine went through the opening and boom. He hit another one. He was wounded. Not dead, but Power was raging pissed. 16 months, he thought. Usually when he said something people listened and he maintained his glare at the squad leader. Then, without a word, he passed on to push through the hedgerow. The corpsmen on the other side were most concerned with the one-legged black Marine who lay there with his open eyes glazing into shock. Power paused to look down. The man was coherent enough to look back up at him and he tried to sound encouraging, "All right, brother, it's going to be all right, we're gonna get you out of here." Power found the trip wire of one of the booby traps, or rather he found the end that had survived the explosion. Brand spanking fucking new, he thought as he examined the wire. Ain't roughened, ain't corroded, ain't weathered, ain't nothing. The NVA had probably rigged it last night or this morning. They knew the Marines were there. They could anticipate what route they would follow north. Power looked out at the terraced hedgerow-lined rice paddies and the intersecting brush and tree lines. I know these motherfuckers are looking at me right now. They are right up here. When the second of the 3 trip-wired grenades blew PFC Blau off his feet, mangling his left leg, and ripping his right leg and left arm with white-hot shrapnel, he instantly flashed to Corporal Meyer and Lance Corporal Saunders. Meyer was his short-statured, field-wise hellraiser of a squad leader, and Saunders was an equally seasoned, black grunt. Both men were short-timers, because Blau had been the only one of 5 replacements who did not require medevac for heat exhaustion during their first hard hump. They had decided he should take over the squad when they rotated. They had spent many a night telling him what he needed to know. Saunders, in particular, had stressed to Blau that he was in Alpha 19, and he really didn't know what that meant, but it means you're going to get hit. What kills guys over here is shock. Do you know a lot of songs? If you get hit, this is what I want you to do: start singing every song you know. Which is just what Blau did as he lay bleeding on the dirt. Blau stopped singing when their 2 corpsmen got to him, asking instead, "Am I going to live? Am I going to live?" The vet corpsman answered, "Yeah." Then Blau kept asking if his balls were all right, and the corpsman muttered, "Yeah, yeah," but Blau was getting freaky about it, so the doc finally took Blau's unwounded right hand and cupped it against his groin. "Your balls are there." Meanwhile, the vet corpsman had his cherry corpsman working on Blau's left foot. As instructed, he cut away the frayed jungle boot, and the horror of the sight suddenly dribbled from his mouth. "Oh my God, look at his foot. I must be pretty fucked up," Blau thought. He couldn't tell. He was in pain, but mostly he was numb, especially after the senior corpsman thumped a morphine syringe into his leg. Gunny Santamasso appeared at his side, and after answering his question regarding what type of booby trap it had been, "Gunny, I wouldn't have stepped on it if I saw what the fuck it was." Blau was lifted into a poncho. A seahorse landed in their smoke-marked clearing-turned-landing zone. The one-legged black Marine, who was in bad shape, but who would survive, was hefted into the cabin, and the other wounded man was being helped in. When Blau, waiting his turn, thought he heard the soft exit of a mortar round from its tube over the slap 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 of the vibrating chopper's propellers. "Gunny, there's mortars." "No, no, you're just delirious." Then Gunny Santamasso also heard the pops of a 60mm mortar, and he roared, "Get him on the fucking chopper," as Blau, inside his poncho, was swung through the doorless door frame. The seahorse, nose down, roared out of the LZ with its 3 bloody, bandaged Marines as the first shells began exploding around Alpha Company. Corporal Haynes's squad from Bravo-2 had taken up positions to the rear of their platoon, and while waiting, PFC Hendry thought again of the premonition he's had as he woke up. It had been so strong that he had turned to his buddy Demers to announce that, today, PFC Hendry is going to get his second 48. A 48 was a wound that required at least 2 days in a hospital, and 2 48-hour hearts, as in, Purple Hearts, qualified a Marine for immediate reassignment off the line. Hendry already had one such wound, picked up over 3 months ago on his first day in the field when the helicopter taking him there was shot down. Now, waiting, Hendry and Demers toyed with the various pieces of shrapnel laying around the old bomb crater at whose edge they sat. The area was tree-shaded, and they had removed their helmets and web gear with its attached ammunition pouches, grenades, and canteens. Holding up a large chunk, Hendry asked his buddy how he'd like to catch that across his knee or arm. Demers grunted. He was only 3 months away from normal rotation and had no desire to have his departure speeded along by a serious wound. Hendry and Demers sorted through the bomb fragments, finding a few marble-sized ones, and Hendry joked that he needed to get hit by one like that for his second 48. The one that would get him home. Suddenly, a shot. More shots. It had been 15 minutes since Bravo-3 had filed by, and that's where the firing was coming from. Then one of the rounds flickered through the tree branches above Hendry and Demers. They triple-timed back into their gear and flattened behind the tree. More shots cracked past. Up ahead, there was even more firing, and Staff Sergeant Burns of Bravo 1, sitting with the company's packs back down Route 561, literally got ice chills in his stomach. This was where his predecessor had been shot and mortally wounded, while crossing a zigzag slit trench. The whole area was an NVA briar patch, a hall of mirrors in which they watched everything the Marines did from their camouflaged entrenchments. Burns had hoped for better this time around. July 2D was, after all, his wife's birthday. The firing on Bravo Company had begun beyond the second crossroad on Route 561, the leftward-leaning T-junction in the marketplace. The 3D platoon's very first casualty was Staff Sergeant Reyes, their platoon commander. His trigger finger was shot off by one of the first sniper shots. He started back down the column to be medevaced as his platoon wheeled to the left flank, west, to assault what appeared to be a squad of snipers in a trench of some sort. The NVA had originally been firing SKS carbines, but when AK-47 automatic weapons joined in, Captain Coates radioed Staff Sergeant Burns of 1st Platoon. Burns was instructed to load one of his squads with M60 ammunition and rush them and a machine gun team up Route 561 to reinforce the contact, and have his other 2 squads stand by if needed. Captain Coates then moved forward to the point elements of 2D platoon to observe what he could of the 3D's fight, leaving his XO, Lieutenant Delaney, back with 60mm section, about 100 meters behind 2D platoon. In his haste to advance, Coates neglected to inform Delaney that he was moving his command group, but even if alerted, Delaney was in no condition to follow. Almost overcome by the heat as he lay on the west side of the road, Delaney had been helped across the cart path by his 2 radio men to a clump of bamboo whose shade offered some relief. The bamboo, however, seriously obstructed their view up the road. Lying there, Delaney got the sudden word from Coates about his advance toward the contact. Coates explained that 3D platoon was heavily engaged and 2D platoon was under some sniper fire. Meanwhile, Sergeant Huff had assembled his 2 60mm mortars on the road behind the 2D and 3D, and Delaney, tucked in the bamboo behind them, told Coates that they had no more rear security. He requested permission to move 1st Platoon up, leaving the packs and resupply where it was, and when Coates agreed, Delaney got Staff Sergeant Burns on the radio. Coates's instructions to Delaney were to maintain the rear half of the company perimeter at the crossroad using Huff's and Burns's people, while he, Coates, in his first firefight, dealt with the NVA firing on them from the left flank. The NVA carried light 60mm mortars with which they were mobile and expert shots. In the space of some 3 minutes, the NVA placed 30 to 40 mortar rounds onto Alpha Company. Captain Slater, however, was among those who could see the flash of one of the tubes. It was visible in a nearby tree line, and Slater called up their best M79 man, a country boy who carried a rucksack full of rounds. The kid was an expert at hitting the target with his first shot, thus giving the enemy no time to react, and sure enough, he dropped his first one right on the money. For good measure, he broke open and reloaded the single-shot M79 3 or 4 more times. As Alpha Company began to unscrew itself from the ground, there was gunfire to the east where Bravo Company was moving. Pow-pow. Da-dow. Da-da-dow. There were single shots, short bursts, then a rushing together of automatic weapons fire and explosions, da-da-da-dow, da-da-da-da-vyar. Corporal Power, 4-1, had never heard a firefight reach such a shattering crescendo so quickly, nor had he ever heard the decibels just peak like that and stay there. VVVVR. No lulls. This is deep shit. Chapter 7, Clay Pigeons. The doctrine of the Marine Corps is that the only way to survive an ambush is to counterattack instantly, to close with the ambushers and overwhelm them. CPL Leon E. Bell, radioman for the 3D Platoon, Bravo Company, 1st Battalion, 9th Marines, tried to orchestrate precisely such a response. In the absence of Staff Sergeant Reyes, their platoon commander and first casualty. Up against what appeared to be a few NVA with SKS carbines in a trench, Bell had 2 of his squads lay down a base of fire while his 3rd squad maneuvered off Route 561 to assault the snipers from the flank. His young voice cool and authoritative, he was just super people, thought Staff Sergeant Burns, who was monitoring the radio. Corporal Bell guided his squad leaders by radio. "Okay, baby, you gotta get up. You gotta go, you gotta get a base of fire down." With M79 grenadiers lobbing rounds toward the enemy trench from the road, the assault squad made its move with Corporal Bell constantly pushing over the radio, "Keep your base of fire up. Keep going, keep going. Pin M down, pin M down. You gotta go." They assaulted right into a platoon's worth of AK-47 fire. Stunned, the assault squad leader radioed back that he was pinned down, but it was too late and Bell responded forcefully, "Well, it's times like this you get off your dead ass and go. You got no choice." There was no place to go. The number of AK-firing NVA multiplied again. They just seemed to materialize inside spider holes and bunkers in the elephant grass and hedgerows, and the entire 3D platoon was soon engulfed. The NVA were utilizing those pre-dug ambush positions that invisibly dotted the Con Tien countryside. And as experience had taught them, they had held the bulk of their fire until their foe were within a few dozen meters, so that the soon-to-be pinned down Marines could not employ air or arty support without endangering themselves. From their concealed positions, the NVA trained their AK-47s down prepared fields of fire, squeezing point-blank bursts into confused Marines seeking cover and brave Marines desperately rising up to find something to shoot back at. Noise and chaos and screams, and Corporal Bell no longer answered the radio. Lance Corporal Herbert, the intelligent, articulate, and very able leader of the 2D squad of Bravo 2, was right behind the monster erupting around Bravo 3. Herbert's platoon sergeant, SGT William E. Hilliard, moved over to Herbert at this time with their 81mm mortar forward observer and radioman. Hilliard, a recently promoted but solid NCO, asked Herbert if he knew what was going on. "No," Herbert said. His radio, which had been giving him trouble all morning, it would receive, but not transmit, had finally just shut down completely. They could hear 3D platoons war on the left flank but had no idea what was happening. At the time, Lance Corporal Herbert had his point squad deployed on the right flank of 2D platoon, facing Hill 70 to the southeast, with his 6 men in widely spaced positions along with a 2-man machine gun team. Because they were short of men, Herbert and his radioman had also assumed a position on the thin line. There was an explosion then on Hill 70, and Herbert saw that 1st Platoon, marching up the trail to reinforce them, was lobbing in rounds from their rearward position. They were indeed. 15 minutes after Captain Coates, Bravo 6, had instructed Bravo 1 Staff Sergeant Burns to send a squad and a machine gun team to reinforce the contact, Lieutenant Delaney, Bravo 5, ordered the other 2 squads forward. They left the company's packs and the supplies just taken off the helicopters, picked up machine gun ammunition, about 100 rounds per man, and were moving up Route 561 when the point squad leader, Corporal McGrath, called to Staff Sergeant Burns that they had movement on their right flank on Hill 70. Burns told McGrath, called to Staff Sergeant Burns that they had movement on their right flank on Hill 70. Burns told McGrath to take them under fire, so the corporal had a law put into action. Its 66mm rocket roared to an impact in the elephant grass of Hill 70. The result was a chain reaction of firing. Lance Corporal Herbert, 4-1, kept his eyes open after the explosion on Hill 70, and then, he too saw the figures moving on the high ground. There were 5 of them, and although it was too far to see faces, Herbert held his fire because they looked unusually tall and were wearing, it appeared, helmets with branches or something sticking from them. They could have been Marines. But 1st Platoon was continuing to fire on them, so Herbert joined in with his M16 sighted on those 5 coming down through the elephant grass. All 5 fell as he opened up. He couldn't tell if he'd hit them or if they'd ducked. Then 2 of them jumped back up, and he shot again and they fell again. Herbert waited, then he saw 2 more figures rushing down the grassy slope. He shot at them, and they, too, all went down. At least temporarily. Some of the NVA bobbing over Hill 70, using the same hand and arm signals and fire and maneuver tactics as the Marines, were wearing Marine flak jackets and helmets, which was designed to cause great confusion. especially if they closed with the Marines. Sergeant Huff had his two 60mm mortars on the trail behind 2D platoon, and Staff Sergeant Burns, coming up from behind, called for a fire mission on Hill 70. Sergeant Huff already had one tube pumping rounds at the trench line that 3D platoon had been assaulting before Camo was lost with them, so he had his other gun crew fire on the hill, which was actually out of sight to them because of the thick brush along the road. They put 4 rounds down the tube, but because of another frazzled radio, their radioman had to run up the trail to see if the riflemen were satisfied with their aim. He ran back to report that they were, so the mortar crew placed 20 more rounds on Hill 70.